There's something about miniaturizing that is fascinating, and I don't know why it's fascinating. But everybody's interested by miniature things.
I think there's something magical about miniature, and I think everyone grows up, even as children we play with,
Yes.
you know, small versions of real life things. Welcome to Artfully Crafted. My name is Alienor, and each week I travel to a craftsperson's studio, interview them and show you their work. This week we're going to Muswell Hill to meet Vicki Ambery-Smith, who's an architectural silversmith. I already knew Vicki's work was sensational, but then when I asked her for a list of museums that have purchased her work for their permanent collection, I was blown away by a list of 11 museums across the UK and the US. So allow me instead to mention just the one, and I'll put the rest of the list in the description below. The Victoria and Albert Museum have acquired one of her brooches for the jewellery department, a miniature of Siena Tower for the silver department, and some of her maquettes and drawings for their prints and drawings collection. Yeah, so thank you so much, Vicki, for having me here in your studio in Muswell Hill. It's very exciting.
Thank you for coming.
It's a great pleasure because I've been admiring your work for a long time. We're both brothers of the Art Workers Guild, and I think you've done some demonstrations there. So I've been, so I was introduced to your work through that.
Yeah.
So maybe we can kick things off with you telling the audience a little bit about your process for materials you use and that sort of thing.
Well, this is the room where it happens.
Mm-hmm.
This is my bench, traditional jewellery bench with work on here. So materials that I use are silver, predominantly silver, sometimes an accent of gold. This is a ring all made from sheet silver, scored, folded, starting with the ring shank. If I'm making a ring to commission, it has to fit first before I build on it. And then accents of red gold and yellow gold. I like this combination. It works well to kind of elevate the silver, but also in a figurative sense.
That's wonderful. And for something like this, how long would you say it takes you to make something like this? Maybe if we talk about from when someone is first approaching you for a commission,
yes,
and all the way to delivery.
Well, if it's a commission piece, then we'd start by perhaps their wish list of what they would like to have included on the ring. And then I assemble a sheet of paper with all the buildings, pictures of the buildings to be included. And then a bit of town planning goes on to work out relative heights and sizes of the things to be included. It'll stand up. For some reason, that's important to me, that it stands.
I love that.
Little sculpture when it's not being worn. So a lot of deliberating, drawing, planning of how this is going to be and conceiving of how it will look from all angles. I didn't grow up with computers. I'm not up with CAD or Rhino that you could just kind of turn a drawing around. But so thinking it through from each side and from the top. As a ring, it's going to be seen from the top mostly, rather more perhaps in profile view. So all of that in consideration. Then when I get the go-ahead, maybe, depending on complexity, 4, 5, 6 weeks to do it.
Wow.
But then it becomes a very personalised item that's maybe quite a biographical piece. Not this one necessarily, this is all based on Venice, but ones that I've done that are kind of portrait of a city with someone's real connection to that place. So their choice of buildings, of perhaps where they lived, where they worked, where they got married, really personalised.
Mm-hmm. And then you're having to think about the composition, how everything is going to fit together in a pleasing way,
Yes.
right? How many, so for this ring specifically, did the composition come to you as it is now, or did you, like, how many drawings, working drawings did you have for it?
Lots of drawings. I wanted something Venetian, recognisably Venetian, but especially for rings, sharp points are impractical, and also vulnerable in themselves, that a thin tower might get bent, might get knocked. Domes work better. So this is the Miraculi church, and then sort of reminiscent palazzo buildings around, not specific. But
so
in
would
the end,
you say that's your, sorry.
Well, in the end, I hope gets some character of Venice in it.
And would you say then that's your biggest challenge? I mean, you also do pieces other than jewellery, but when it comes to making jewellery, would you say that's your biggest challenge, also thinking about the practicality of it for the wearer?
Yes, it's got to be wearable, and you might think, is that wearable?
I can certainly imagine some very fabulous parties where it would be quite the conversation piece.
And it's much more comfortable than you'd imagine, and the bulk of it is above your hand. You still could play the piano or a keyboard or whatever you want to do. It doesn't hinder, it doesn't get in the way. I couldn't put a glove over it, but yes, it has to be reasonably practical and comfortable. And it's not too heavy, is it?
No, it's not actually. I was surprised by that, but I guess is there a lot of hollow space in the...
Each building is constructed like a small box with the windows cut out before I add it to the basic ring shape. And I've done rings based on different cities. Oxford works very well, made a lot of Oxford ones. I've done Amsterdam and Cambridge, Venice quite a lot. Paris wouldn't work. That would be nice, but no.
How come?
Because you'd have to have the Eiffel Tower.
Would you?
Only that, unless I did the Sacré-Cœur on its own, that would be fine. But you can't really have Paris without the tower, and for aforementioned practical reasons, no, but also then it becomes kitsch.
It is a tricky one.
Could be Hyde Park, Marble Arch, I mean.
I'm trying to think, there's Invalides, Sacré-Cœur. Actually, something, I don't know if that could be adapted. The Opéra Garnier is quite a good one. That's quite beautiful.
Perhaps on its own.
Yeah, maybe on its own. That could be. Okay, that will be my challenge then, is to think of something that could scream Paris but not be the Eiffel Tower. I'll think on it. I'm going to Paris soon, so as I walk around, I can keep an eye out.
Yes, yes. But there aren't, that I can think of, other absolutely iconic Paris buildings. Well, you could have the Louvre with the pyramid.
I'm also thinking,
but they would have to have the pyramid to make it the Louvre.
Yeah, you could also have, maybe not as a ring, but as cufflinks, you could have, say, like, you know, the metro gates for Art Nouveau.
Oh, yeah.
That would make a really good one.
That would be nice.
That'd be very pretty.
Yes.
There you go.
There you
My
go.
contribution.
Thank you. Thank you. Paris cufflinks. Yes.
So what would you say, because we have spoken a little bit about, obviously, the time it takes, and that's your time.
Yes.
But you also work with, you know, precious materials. So what would you say when you're pricing a piece, what would you say is the biggest consideration for you?
Well, the metals are, of course, an expense. Silver, gold especially, and the prices go on ever upwards.
The gold prices have been going up quite a lot, right?
Yes, come down a tiny bit recently, but within the scheme of things, the last 2-3 months, been much dearer than before. It's never clear to me why that happens, and if you wait a week, if it's going to drop. Not that it makes that much difference to me. If I'm making something small and detailed, then it's the time taken that's the added value, the added expense. and the materials aren't necessarily that, the cost of the materials aren't necessarily that relevant to the additional price. So if somebody asked me to make that in copper, it wouldn't be worth doing. There's no point wasting the time on copper because it would be the same number of hours. And it may as well be precious metal.
Interesting.
Would make, maybe £100 difference, but
yeah, at that point you might as well.
May as well be in silver and gold. But the larger the item, the proportion, of course, of the silver involved is much more, and it's much harder to do a realistic price on a larger item. This is a candle holder that can take a tea light.
Would you say, so when you're comparing something like this versus the ring that we were just looking at,
Yes.
would you say that the fact that you're working in an even smaller scale with the ring,
Yes.
that it actually takes you more time?
Yes.
Okay, so in a way, with something
More-
like this, you're paying more for materials, but
Yes.
actually something like a ring, there would be an increased amount of time
But-
spent on it.
Also, that can carry a higher price. So for the time taken, I can ask a higher price than an hourly rate for this. I would then have to just half or
Really?
minimum wage if I'm lucky.
Oh, wow.
Nowhere near, even after 45 years of working, you just can't charge a real hourly rate for that.
Just because
Where a picture frame
of-
or a plumber might charge £70 an hour. No way.
Why? Because it's a candle holder and people aren't willing
Yes.
to? Okay. So
Yeah.
they're willing to for jewellery.
And if I say
but not-
that's £10,000, you think, well, no, I can get a candle holder somewhere else.
I see.
But so I'll think of a price that I think it might
And so is that...
be acceptable rather than a real living wage price.
Right. And so does that have to be a consideration for you in terms of prioritising which commissions to take? Something
Yes.
that might be more, no one likes to think worth your time, but you do have to make a living from, this is your
Yes.
full-time occupation.
Yes.
So do you have to sort of balance between projects where you're going to be able to ask for a proper hourly rate versus others that you might want to make, but...
Yes, but it's a balance of working on commission pieces and things that I just want to make. Then that's my indulgence. And then if it sells, well, that's a bonus.
Yeah.
Rather than thinking that I would make those for a living. And
Pricing is a really tricky thing to talk about
It's very
because
difficult.
at the end of the day, you're someone who's passionate about what they do
Yes.
first.
Yes. If you're advising somebody about pricing,
Yeah.
you think of an hourly rate you'd like and the material cost times 3 and then how many days, weeks it's going to take.
Because I think
And the end price might be enormous. And you think, well, I can't carry that price.
And it's really tricky, I think, especially, if you had someone who was starting out in, for example, on the path,
Yes.
that you are on, if they're starting out and they're trying to work out how to price themselves, I think that's always something that artists find really difficult.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
you sort of have to try different things, and I guess what you can ask will, as you say, depend on the object, depend on the person,
Yes.
depend on the purpose, and
Yes. And it's true that some things end up subsidising other things.
yeah.
It just is the way.
Yeah, I think that's part of every creative practice, is that it's an uncomfortable truth, but you
Yes.
have to sort of...
Yes. Has to be some manoeuvre there, give or take.
Speaking about starting out, how did you start out? How did you... I mean, this is
Well-
very niche, right? I don't know many people who make things like you do.
It's funny, it doesn't seem niche to me. Well, I started out a very long time ago. It's the only bench I've ever had, so that's 40-odd years old. A friend made it for me. I went to art school, art foundation. With a good art foundation, you try a bit of everything. Drawing, life drawing, technical drawing, and colour theory, and sculpture and photography, interior design, or theatre design. We did fashion shoe design, fabulous. not many foundation courses like that anymore.
Yeah, but it sounds really comprehensive.
But it's really good. And through that year, you're really trying a bit of everything. You're discovering whether small scale, large scale, surface decoration, 3D, which aspects you're really taken with. And it's a real year of discovery, and it became evident that I was always distracted by small scale 3D.
Right.
So having thought at the outset I would do theatre design, and a short dalliance with architecture along the way, in the end what I'm doing really is theatrical architecture.
I love that. That's a real combination of things that you love.
Yes. And there's something about miniaturizing that is fascinating, and I don't know why it's fascinating. But everybody's interested by miniature things.
I think there's something magical about miniature, and I think everyone grows up, even as children we play with, small versions of real life things. So what did you do after your foundation year then?
Well, jewellery was suggested as in 3D sculptural, small scale. Not that I'm overly interested in high-end jewellery or pearls and diamonds. It's not, as you see, it's not that. But so then I went to, as it was then, Hornsey Art School, a very famous place at the time, with a terrific contemporary jewellery course started by Gerda Flockinger back in the 1970s. So I did that 3 years, and we were trained, the course was structured 2 days a week, drawing, just visual research, drawing, modelling, whatever you wanted to do, whatever took your interest, and then developing, extracting ideas for jewellery designs from your research. And in my third year, second year, I went to Salzburg and just was drawing the view from a balcony quite high up. And I thought, this place is like Oxford, where I grew up. And it really struck a chord. And I started doing architectural forms then, very much simplified and abstracted. I thought, well, the buildings are somebody else's work. That's their design. I shouldn't do that. But I soon got over that. Because I thought, what I'm doing with their architecture is not more architecture. It's representational.
Yeah, totally. It's your own interpretation of it and how the different buildings interact with each other. And it sounds like drawing is really, was and still is at the core of your practice. Am I right in thinking that?
Yes. If you ask me to make something on any particular building, I can easily look it up. So I get pictures on the internet. But then I have to draw what I'm going to do with that building. It's all well and good to have the picture of the building, but then I might need to rework it in some way or edit it. It's not going to be literal. And it may, from my point of view, need to be slightly higher in proportion or wider, usually higher, because...
So do you start with a measured drawing, but then you sort of play around with it and adjust it to what you want?
I found this online, so that's perfect because it's head on.
Yeah.
That's photograph of the actual building. When you see the building, you're seeing it from the pavement level and you're looking up at it. With a model of it, you're going to see it from a very different angle. And so, in fact, there's a certain amount of raised height with this, so that it looks right when you're looking at it from a different angle from the pavement.
Fine. So you're taking the initial elevation, but then you're adapting it to how you want the object to be perceived.
Yes. So that's why I have to draw that all out and make a card maquette to show the customer that this is the actual size I'm intending. So a lot of preparation, planning before I start. I don't want to launch into silver before I know absolutely how it's going to be.
Yeah.
And also that the customer understands that this is how it's going to be. This is how it opens.
That's wonderful.
So that we absolutely agree beforehand of what I'm going to make, and that they're happy with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned the jewellery school that you went to. Were there any particular teachers or maybe artists that you looked up to, or maybe courses that you've done subsequently? Or
Certainly a very good design tutor.
Mm-hmm.
She was fantastic. Sadly no longer alive. Vera Lane. She was an artist in her own right, in the kind of direction of Bridget Riley.
Mm-hmm.
Probably contemporary, more or less. But she got us really looking, really observing, and there was always something to comment on. It might be a watch strap or somebody else's earrings, or just extraordinary how she observed, and she got us really observing everything, and lots of discussion, comment, feedback on each other's ideas and things. You'd suggest a proposed idea and she'd challenge you about why that. You'd have to defend it a little bit, which is really good, very good practice. And I think maybe self-taught people don't know that they've missed that.
Yeah, they might not have that grounding and foundation in that practice.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you grew up in Oxford.
Yes.
I think that's come up in your work, right?
Yes.
Would you say that that's the architecture of Oxford has really sort of inspired and shaped your work in a way?
And of course, I didn't think of Oxford as anything special. It was my normal. It's where I grew up. Went through the old town every day to school. It was only when I left it and came to London, I thought, this is ugly.
Yeah,
this is very different. So yes, I didn't appreciate it then, but of course, since.
So what are some favourite buildings in Oxford?
Well, got to be the Radcliffe Camera, the round James Gibbs building.
That's a special
in
one.
the middle. It's so iconic, but it's perfect. It wouldn't change an element, would you?
No,
It's
the proportions.
ideal. Yeah. Must have been a very bold decision to build it when they chose that at the time.
And we're talking about, education and crafts and drawing being an important part of your practice. Looking at where things were when you were learning your craft and what things are like now. What sort of institutions do you see as good places to learn now? And what are sort of gaps or things that you think have been lost that you'd love to see more of?
Well, there are far fewer places now. My college became Middlesex Poly, became Middlesex University. It's gone. It's gone now, long since. The building where I worked, ugly dump, but very creative in fashion and ceramics and furniture, jewellery, silver, is completely gone, as so many art courses have. So that's a big loss. I'm not that well up on generally what's available, but Central School, Central St Martin's doing good stuff, jewellery. Glasgow, amazing. Edinburgh as well, terrific.
Edinburgh College of Art.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, and Glasgow, it's had this tragedy with the fire, but still it's a very creative place while it's being rebuilt. Perhaps it's different there because Scottish people can go to university free, which, as you know, in England we can't. And for an English to go to Scotland, the fee paying. So that, I'm sure, makes a huge difference. I really don't know if I would still go to art school at that price. I don't know.
Yeah. Was it free when you went?
Yes.
Right.
And free tools, which I still have.
Wow.
Well, we sort of notionally paid a few pounds for them, but
fine.
yeah,
that's incredible.
Everything provided, amazing. My paint box over there.
So what was it? Was it government funded or? Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we don't.
Tory government, Margaret Thatcher's time.
All right. So what would you see, and I guess we're getting a little bit political there, but what would you like to see, future governments do? What do you think would be productive ways of supporting
Well, I think there's
the
a
field?
complete and utter assumption that creative Britain, it is hugely creative. There's so much here. And the powers that be have rested back thinking, yeah, it's great, keep doing it, but without supporting it at all. And as we know, Michael Gove marginalised it hugely, saying, you're wasting your time unless you're doing STEM subjects. So the resources for schools have plummeted. You think of primary schools, and the kids are endlessly making, playing, mucking about with plasticine or splodgy paints. So as young children, you do that. Get a bit older, and you're wasting your time. You should be doing your maths. I caricature, but
No,
you see what
but
I mean.
Yeah.
And then it's prohibitively difficult, expensive to go on with it, or even to discover what they might be.
Yeah.
I think the reassuring thing is, though, that people who want to be creative are finding ways to do it.
Yeah.
Whether it means doing a few days work placement here or there, or part-time courses, there is this burning desire to make things, to create, to do, and people are finding ways to do it.
I think the tricky thing, though, is that, as you say, if your raison d'etre is making, you're going to find a way to do that.
Yeah.
But it then comes at the cost of maybe having to move away from family, or giving up on the dream of home ownership,
Yes.
or putting off starting a family.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's not, you know, something that the current generation of makers, you know, we're not going to see that until further down the line.
The number of people who continued with it from college reduced significantly, maybe after a couple of years or 3. Even back then, it was difficult when there were more galleries, more craft galleries, craft shops, exhibitions. There was more then. There's far less now.
Yeah, so that's something that we wanted to talk about, right, is how over time the landscape of generally the art market has changed, and how do you connect with people and, you know, come across potential customers? How do you think that's changed?
I certainly started out with a handful of galleries around the country. So the Oxford Gallery, that was tremendous, with applied art, with fine art together, it was great. With that and Electrum Gallery, that was in South Molton Street, just contemporary jewellery, international. So we saw work from Germany and America and other places, exhibiting along with ours. It was fantastic, gone. Oxford Gallery closed about 15 odd years ago.
Right.
Contemporary applied arts continues, but keeps moving, and it's rather reduced in size, but still does great work. Very high standard of stuff. It's just a shame it's not better known, but that all comes down to marketing and expense. And, so far fewer. I have some things in museum shops, like the Soane Museum, which is all about architecture, really.
Of course.
And in America, the V&A closed their shop, which used to be my mainstay, really.
What do you mean?
The Craft Council had a section within the V&A shop when it was in the old position that's now a changing gallery.
Right.
They rejigged, so now the shop is much bigger, brighter.
So what you're saying is before they had sort of a gallery.
Was a designation thing, just a small space within the shop, and it was brilliant. And the V&A has a captive audience. I think a large amount of things, as I'm now finding out, went to America. I didn't know that at the time. Galleries never told me who bought things. In fact, kept it really secret. Really
I see, because they didn't want you to.
Writer bought one of your rings.
Right.
Wouldn't tell me who. Now they can't even try because of the internet.
Yeah.
But that was a huge loss when that particular place went. And these things haven't been replaced.
Right. And you don't think that social media has helped compensate that?
It has. I get more from Instagram I would say largely a lot of commissions through Instagram,
Okay.
which I never thought would happen.
Mm-hmm.
And lockdown was fantastic because people couldn't go out, so you could only trawl the internet.
And actually, in a way, you were bringing architecture to their home in miniature, and they could
Yes.
visit places. So that's a great way
Yes.
of escapism.
And of course, then you could send more details, a short video, pictures from every angle, and so on. So to really explain the object that they were inquiring about.
So in a way, lockdown was a great time of creativity for you.
Well, it was odd in that I suddenly felt all complete loss of motivation for quite a while. I had to really force getting anything made, even though there was no reason why I couldn't work at home and complete access to this space. And somebody got in touch and said, oh, short notice, is there any chance you can make a ring for my wife's birthday in 3 weeks' time? I thought, yes, a deadline.
Deadlines are important.
Yes, absolutely. Everything has a deadline, whether it's Goldsmiths Fair or a wedding, retirement, anniversary. There's always a deadline. But when those go, it completely adrift.
You know, you've talked about the fact that you work here on your own. And obviously it has great advantages of having a home studio, but the downside is also sometimes it can get perhaps a little bit lonely. A lot of artists feel that, you know, it is really beneficial to have other artists sort of bounce ideas off with, etc.
Yeah.
What have been organisations or places or networks that you've reached out to throughout your career to sustain you?
There are a number of other artists and creatives around locally, so that's nice. Otherwise, the Art Workers Guild, it's always inspiring. Whoever you get chatting to, it's extraordinary. There's amazing energy about the place, where people kind of seize on each other. I suppose a lot of us work on our own, and you think, so what do you do?
Yeah, absolutely.
And often some collaborations arise from that, or exchanges, working on something. We do a swap with another brother from the guild.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's such a diverse group of people, and it's quite interesting because it's so many people from different disciplines, and it actually makes you realise sometimes you can learn something from a discipline that you thought might have nothing to do with what you do, and but actually you get a different angle. And so we've talked, I mean, obviously the common thread of all your work is architecture. So what is, let's say, a commission that you haven't had yet, but that you would love to?
Oh, gosh.
Have you got a little wish list?
It is a question that comes up.
Yeah.
It's easier to say other things that wouldn't work. Or,
Oh, go on then.
or
Tell
how
me what wouldn't work.
react
We've
to-
talked about the Eiffel Tower. That wouldn't work.
Yeah. St Pancras
Ah.
International.
Yeah.
It's so vast, wonderful
Right.
building. But you can't really take an element of it that would speak for the whole building
I see.
and still be recognisable that it's based on.
Trying to think of maybe New York would be a challenge.
That would be nice. I did do a ring on New York.
Yeah.
And actually that is quite identifiable. You'd have to have the Chrysler building.
Yes.
Wonderful. That would be nice to work more on I haven't done anything other than this one piece in the ring. So there are identifiable towers that would identify, and of course the Empire State Building. Have to be a bit simplified.
Yeah, I was going to say, because do you use the full height of a building, or do you just sort of would
be
use like details?
Relative heights, but also you can make use of the side,
see.
make the thing look higher. So start halfway down. Having said that, sharp points are not so successful on ring. If you have a cluster of them, they protect each other. So,
And earlier we touched on, you mentioned balancing commissions with things that you want to make. Is there sort of a formula for you trying to keep that balance of things you want to make versus commissions? Do you sort of try to reserve some time for not play, but, experimentation?
I think it rather depends if there's an exhibition coming up or an event. Goldsmith Fair, that's the end of September. If I see what I have, but and just might need one or two other pieces to make a whole display. So then I'll think about what else would be good for that, which is a piece I wanted to make, the painting by Vermeer of Delft. There's just one survives of a landscape, a view of Delft, and in the middle of the painting is a little watch house, and that absolutely leapt out at me. That wonderful exhibition of Vermeer in Amsterdam last year. That
you went to it? Amazing.
So I've made that box. I've made a box based on that building, and people have said to me, "How do you know what it was like at the sides and the back?" I said, "Well, we don't, but no one else does either, so I decide."
I love that. What are things that you wish people knew about your work or understood about the process before they approach you for a commission? What would sort of make those initial exchanges easier?
Well, they might be approaching from the point of view of their connection with that building. And I need to interpret that in a way that will make that building or the object connect with them. So I was once asked to make a box based on a house in Hampstead, beautiful house, and the owner said, "We want the whole house. Come and see. Let me show you around." And he showed me the back and the front and everything. And I realised when I was looking around that actually, if we do the whole house, what we would then see when you're looking at the object is all roof. Well, you've never seen the roof of your house, have you? And that's not what greets you when you come home. You come home to the door, not the roof. So I did a mock-up proposing that it was the facade and that we didn't bother with the whole of the rest of it. So persuading the customer gently, but that their idea is a great idea. It would work even better like this.
Right, so having a specific idea, but then also coming to you with an open mind as to how you might suggest to make it work, right?
Yes.
Perfect.
So to win him over, I made a maquette of what he proposed, but I didn't spend too long on that. And then I made a much better maquette of what I was proposing.
I love that.
Yes.
Is there anything else that I haven't touched on that you think is... is something that you'd like to talk about or that you'd like to share?
Well, I would never have known I'd still be doing this after 40 odd years. Not long after I'd started on this theme, somebody said to me, "Aren't you a bit limited with this architecture?" I saw him again recently. He bought a copy of my book. And I said, "Do you remember when we first met, you said,
yeah,
aren't you limited with this?" And he said, "Would you write that in the book?"
Oh, I love that. Oh, that's really nice.
So I think my understanding of architecture has developed hugely, where I knew nothing. I was completely ignorant on the subject when I started out. It was just purely visual, observational, and now I understand a bit more what I'm doing, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly looks like it. Well, thank you so much for having me here and indulging me and asking all these burning questions I had.
Thank you. It's been fun. Good questions.
Thank you, Vicki. I want to take this opportunity to tell you a little bit more about the Artworkers Guild, which Vicki and I are both members of. It's an educational charity with over 400 members from across 60 visual arts and crafts disciplines. We've just started a fundraising campaign to support and increase the outreach work we already do with school children, educators, refugees, and early career makers. I hope you'll agree it's for a good cause. To be fully transparent, the Guild has an event hire business that covers the maintenance of our building, and the annual membership fees cover all the talks and exhibitions for our membership. Therefore, the Guild is a healthy, self-sustaining organisation, and the money raised through this fundraising campaign will go entirely towards the outreach programme. And of course, the more money we raise, the more ambitious we can be with that good work. I've included the link to our Just Giving page below, and thank you in advance for any donations you can spare. Thank you for watching. It means a lot, especially as at this moment the channel is entirely self-funded. So please spread the word and subscribe. See you next week. Was that loud enough?
That's very loud.
Okay.
So loud I took the headphones off.
Good.